Good morning. Today is February 24th, 2025. And in our forms class today, we're going to talk about the Escalation Addendum. As of January 2025, the Northwest MLS has created new forms for the Escalation Addendum. These forms were added for clarity and consistency. And the new forms we'll be discussing today are going to be the 35E, which is the Escalation Addendum, 35EC, which is the calculation form for the escalation if used, and then the 35EN, which is the notice of calculation response. So why have these forms been added to the library? Due to popular demand, the Northwest MLS did add these to create and clarify how to do the escalation formula, how to calculate the escalated amount, to provide a calculation form itself that was very detailed to be able to show all of the new places that we have negotiation opportunities. They wanted to create a uniform calculation method to create consistency across the board when agents are using escalation addendums. This is a great way to also provide a form that has accounting checks. Within the forms that we'll be discussing, you'll see that there are bullet points and spaces for every negotiable part of our contract, which all have to be taken into consideration when it comes to the net price and in the end, the purchase price. They wanted to provide a response option for the buyer that has very clear options. So let's look at the revised escalation addendum. Again, this is a revised form of the one we've already been using. So if you're familiar with the previous escalation addendum, this one is in fact different. The form was numbered the same, and it just has a few changes. When do we use the escalation addendum? If there's a competing offer, the buyer can include the escalation addendum. This form gives the buyer control to decide how much higher over the escalated price they would like to go. This form also creates a maximum purchase price that they'll be willing to pay. Each offer situation will be different, so deciding when and how to use this addendum will be a conversation between you and your client. Remember that this is in fact a complicated form, so if you're not clear on how to use it or proficient in using it, make sure you're referring to a managing broker for some guidance on it. All right, so in paragraph 1, the buyer will put the escalation amount. The escalation amount is the amount over the competing offer that the buyer wishes to pay. There are strategies surrounding what numbers to put in this blank, but you can discuss these options with your buyer when filling this box out. The most important thing to remember is that this number is going to be what your buyer pays over the next highest offer in order to win in that position. The next box option that we can fill in line 13 is the maximum purchase price. So this is the top number that your buyer will be willing to pay, and in no situation would the buyer go over this amount. Our escalated amounts are calculated with all the contract terms within both offers. These are also careful things to consider when making an offer that you have an escalation in. In order to escalate an offer, there must be a competing offer that meets the term requirements in paragraph 2. The competing offer must be a bona fide arm's length transaction that will be paid out in full at closing. There cannot be a 22B or anything that would make a closing date arbitrary within the competing offer. A 22Q, which is a pending sale, is allowed to be used as an escalating offer, but the competing offer must have a closing date. Because in paragraph 2 right here, we can escalate based on the parameters of that closing date. Now, the closing date of the offer being used to escalate defaults to 60 days unless it is otherwise changed. And as we all know in our market, 60 days is a very extended closing time. So if you want your offer to be compared to a similar apples to apples offer, consider changing that number from its default of 60 days. Otherwise, if a competing offer comes in with an extended closing, it can be used to escalate your buyer's offer up. In order to be used for that escalation offer, all the requirements have to be met from paragraph 2. Once an offer is used to escalate, the seller responds with a third EC, the escalation calculation worksheet. So it must be delivered with a competing offer and again, meet the requirements in paragraph 2. This is what makes it a truly legitimate escalating offer. The competing offer must be with the new escalation worksheet. If an escalator is used, then it must be delivered with the competing offer from all the requirements in paragraph 2. The seller may have more time to deliver that competing offer than on the same day. We used to have to deliver it the same day as an escalation was used, but in paragraph 4, we actually can control those timelines. Now, the default for those timelines is 3 days for a seller to send you the competing offer so you can check it and make sure it is, in fact, a legitimate offer. And then the buyer's response time is also noted in paragraph 4. If any of these days need to be changed, remember that they do have a default of 3 days to deliver the offer and 1 day for the buyer's response. Once the seller delivers the 35 EC, the buyer may check the calculations. When looking at the worksheet, the buyer can see calculations input by the seller, and they will have the opportunity to speak up if they're not in agreement. Again, these timelines are noted on the 35E, which is the Escalation Addendum. And please note paragraphs 4A, B, and C. These are all new provisions that were put into our Escalation Addendum. There are timelines for what happens if the offer is considered a non-qualifying offer. There are timelines that are set for the response for if the calculations are incorrect. So there is no longer a page in this escalation addendum for the buyer and seller to sign. We used to have the blank calculations. There is now a detailed worksheet of how these calculations are made. By signing the escalation addendum, both buyer and seller are in agreement to abide by the calculations on this worksheet. Now, there is a chance to check them and challenge them if they are incorrect, but this is what the buyer is already agreeing to. Now, these formulas can probably blow your mind just by looking at them, so don't get too overwhelmed just yet. Everything here is going to be calculated for you, but having the conversation with your with your client who's filling out this escalation addendum, it's good to know which items are put in and taken into consideration. Remember, the computer will automatically do this for us, so it's imperative that we input the correct numbers to calculate. So once the calculation is done, it is put into the worksheet 35C. This is a new form in our forms library. The form 35C is a form that the seller sends back with the calculations on it. As of January 2025, this form was created to create the consistency of the calculation when inputting the escalating offer. We just need to make sure that we're putting all the numbers in correctly because it does do the auto calculation. Now, this is what the calculation form looks like. Remember, some of these get inputted by you and some of them are automatically calculated. All of the highlighted ones are going to be the input that we do as the agent in response. And the lines without a highlight on them, such as lines 16, 18, 23, and 26, those are all auto-calculated by this new form. So how do we put in these calculations? When we use this form, we'll be looking at 2 different offers because we have one that we're trying to accept and one that we're trying to use to escalate that one into the top position. Excuse me. The top sections A through F are for the competing offer. I've color-coded this so you can get an idea of which offers go into which places, although it is noted on the form. If you're confused about which offers to put where, please ask. These numbers make a huge difference. The offer that you are anticipating will be the offer not accepted is the competing offer, and the offer being escalated is the one that's going to be the higher priced. Sections G through O are for the offer being escalated, the potential winning offer. The last line is going to calculate the final purchase price. Make sure you note that these boxes will use the buyer's offer or the competing offer. So make sure you are putting in the correct offers in the correct box. So looking into more detail on how we fill this out. Oh, sorry, I skipped the first half of that. Sorry. So your first offer, I don't know how I got way over there. Your first offer, the compensation amount is, oops, sorry. First, we want to start out in A with the maximum escalated price from the Form 35. This is going to be the maximum purchase price of the competing offer if it contains an escalation provision. If it doesn't include an escalation provision, then you put their offer price right in there as you normally would calculate. Second, in the buyer's competing offer, are there any credits to the buyer? Credits to the buyer would be considered something like closing costs from lenders, anything financial that is credited to the buyer. When we're talking about compensation, we would put credits to the buyer as well. If there's a dollar amount of compensation, it goes in the dollar section. If there's a percentage of compensation calculated, it goes in the percentage. So I did add credits to buyer, line 13. That would be what the buyer broker compensation is from line 17B of your purchase and sale agreement. On D, this would be any credits back to the seller. This is not necessarily including a compensation reduction. It's only including other credits back to the seller. An example of this would be if the buyer wants to credit the seller, say $2,000 towards the seller's escrow fees. So I don't know of too many other situations, but if there is a credit to the seller, the credit to the seller would go in the dollar amounts or percentage amounts. It will auto calculate the final net price to the seller. Don't get scared when you see the net price because they do take buyer compensation being paid into consideration. When it comes to the final calculated purchase price, it is put back in. So both offers are going to be escalated just as we did before. These forms are to create the consistency and clarity as to what the net offer is for the seller in each situation. So it also helps us have those conversations of different terms that might be within the contracts. Sections G through O are going to be for the other offer that you have. This section comes from the offer that is being escalated up. With this form, the seller can compare not only the final purchase price, but the net offers in comparison. The final purchase price is calculated as the end result with all the information added, and the purchase price will not necessarily be the same as the seller's net price. The final number you want to look at is going to be paragraph P, line 26, the calculated new purchase price. If the buyer does not think the seller properly calculated the purchase price, the buyer would deliver a 30N. This is a new form that is a notice. This form was added January 2025. So when would you use this form? Did the seller follow all the parameters set forth in paragraph 2 in the escalation addendum? Did the seller fail to deliver a competing offer? Did the seller enter incorrect information and make that calculation incorrect? If you are not in agreement with what's on the 35EC, the calculation form, you would use 35EN to respond with how you think it should have been calculated or to call out an offer that may not have been a qualifying escalating offer. If the seller failed to deliver the competing offer within the time specified on 35E, then the offer cannot escalate the buyer's offer. The buyer can give notice of this once the time has come to deliver that offer. Remember, our timelines are set forth in our Form 35E, paragraph 2. If no competing offer is received or if any information is redacted, the buyer may respond with the selection of buyer's notice of no competing offer. If the competing offer is received by the buyer but falls outside the parameters in 35E, paragraph 2, it would not be a qualifying offer to escalate. This would be an offer that was outside of the closing date window or an offer that contained a 22B. An offer that falls outside the parameters set in 35E would not be an offer able to escalate the buyer. Therefore, the buyer may deliver the notice that the escalation is invalid. The selection for this would be the buyer's notice of non-competing offer. If the buyer challenges the calculated purchase price, the buyer may select the buyer's notice of new purchase price. If this box is selected, a 35EC must also be attached with the buyer's calculations. Once the notices are delivered, the seller may respond to terminate if no agreement can be reached. If this outcome is concerning to you, I would advise you to consider having your seller counteroffer with what they believe should be the new purchase price and avoid using the escalation addendum. This form is considered one of the more complicated forms, and it's not always advisable in every situation. In the Northwest MLS, we have calculation tools under Northwest MLS Financial Tools to calculate the escalated amount. Use this tool to practice or when discussing your buyer's escalated offer before you respond to the escalation addendum. Can a seller redact information when submitting a competing offer? No, the seller may not redact any information from a competing offer if that offer is being used to escalate. I thank you for your attention, and I'm here to answer any additional questions that you may have when using the escalation addendum.